very good morning and welcome to Morning Express on this 22nd day of May 2020. I sure do hope that you're having yourself a good day so far. And, well, looking forward to a great weekend right here on Morning Express. As usual, on Friday, we like to do it a little bit different as we introduce the weekend. And I know that weekends are no longer what they used to be before COVID, BC. COVID. And, well, we still want to ensure that we have some entertainment news and let you know what's happening in the entertainment world right here as we review the week and look at what things have been happening. Of course, it's been a very, very active week, particularly politically speaking, and we'll be weighing in on that and looking at that. Also, it is the week that Kenya has hit the 1,000 mark in terms of positive cases of COVID-19. What does that mean? What is the Ministry of Health projecting? Remember, at some projection, they had told us that by April, we're going to hit 10,000. But that was if we did not put any precautions and measures in place. So are we at a good place or not? It's also at a time where we are staring at locking down more counties and more areas based on the numbers that have been found. All that is what we're going to be looking at right here on Morning Express. I do encourage you to participate in the conversation and to participate in the show. The Twitter handle is at Michael G. Gitonga or at KTN News, or you can also use the hashtag Morning Express, KTN Morning Express, and we'll be more than glad to hear from you. So do let us know what your thoughts are, and welcome to the show. For now, we're going to start off with looking at what's making headlines on the dailies. As usual, we start off with the Standard, where the headline is Curse of Kingmakers. This is specifically referring to the political scenarios that we have in Kenya. And remember, yesterday we were looking and highlighting politics of betrayal, where it looks like it's a consistent thread that runs through our political system right from independence, from the time of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta to where we are right now. There just seems to be unkept promises and what we'd call betrayal, but now the Standard refers to it as the curse of the kingmaker. And they've highlighted, the kingmakers here. You have the likes of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who was there, of course, during independence, and at the point where Mzee Jomo Kenyatta became president. But remember, they had a fallout. You have the likes of Tom Mboya, who again were there to ensure that governance was something that was followed and that Kenya had a new president under, the new reign of now independence. But again, that went south. You have the likes of Mwai Kibaki, who, remember, Raila Amolo Odinga saying Kibaki tosha, and that was at a point where Moi was going out of office. And remember, it was literally the whole country almost coming together to say Kibaki tosha, and it was expected that Raila Odinga would probably take after Kibaki. That did not happen. Move over to Moi and the likes of Charles Njonjo, another kingmaker who ensured that Moi got into power and stayed in power. He was an attorney general for a long time, and it was expected that at least he would get, to either deputy president or presidency at some point. That did not happen. Fast forward, and we're in 2020 now, and we know exactly what's happening. We have Uhuru Kenyatta, yangu kumi, yako kumi, which was what was said. But again, of course, that has been termed as a political rhetoric that was not expected to be followed through as a promise. But we do know what's happening right now. Of course, that's as we stare at Jubilee, as they continue to clean up, as it were. And today is one of those days where we expect to see a bit more of cleanup if the stories we have seen and if the narratives we have seen going before us are anything to go by, where we expect Kithure Kindiki to be hounded out of office. He was requested to apologize for what he had done, but that had not been forthcoming, so we're waiting to see how that goes. So the headline of the Standard this morning is mainly to do with the politics of Kenya. They do the spade work, and that's what the Standard is referring to them as. They do the spade work, but once the king is enthroned and comfortably in office, they are shoved into disgrace. That's the story of the nation's political henchmen since independence in 1963. Is that going to change in 2022? We can only wait and see. But if we were to look at things as per what's happening today, then it's likely that the narrative that has been there since independence till now is likely to carry on. So that's an elaborate story right there on The Standard. On to page 4 of The Standard, and let's look at COVID-19 and where we are today as a country. And according to this particular article, Kibra stares at a country, at a lockdown as the country reports 80 new cases. This, of course, is something that had been highlighted before, that high-density areas are a major risk when it comes to COVID-19, because all you need is just 1 or 2 cases, and of course the effect of that is that it's going to spread very, very, very fast. So yesterday's numbers pushed the coronavirus tally to 1,109, with the state projecting daily figures to hit 200 in August. Of course, this is also based on the numbers that we are testing, because one of the key issues that has been, of concern is the number of tests that we're able to do as a country. Because remember, we'll only get the right numbers when we are able to test huge numbers. So the 200 that is being projected in August may still be a low figure based on how many people are tested. So of course, to keep and flatten the curve, then we have to increase the number of tests done per day. But now where we are right now, we do know that we have Old Town locked down, we have Eastleigh locked down. Kibra is looking like it could be the next area to be locked down, where there'll be nobody allowed to come in or go out until this is contained. So the government is considering locking down Kibra in the COVID-19 pandemic, as they try to fight that, and as we hit the highest figure tested, but also the highest figure reported of positive cases. So 200 cases daily is what we are projecting to have as a country by August. And just to give you a rundown, the testing capacity per day is expected to go up to 40,000. The total number that we have so far now is 1,109 confirmed cases. So far, we have 50 deaths that have been reported, which are directly associated to COVID-19. We have 665 male and 393 female. That, of course, would also be something that should be of interest to scientists, why we have more males, and almost double, really, more male dying from COVID-19 than females. So recoveries, we have 375, which is, I think, something that we also need to be highlighting more than we are right now, because the recoveries are 375, and the number of testing centers so far in the country are 22. Of course, the Ministry of Health has continued to ensure that they keep us posted on this, but the message is wash your hands, sanitize, social distance, and wear your masks whenever you're in public places. The numbers are increasing, and you don't want to be caught on that side of the day, on that side of the curve where you have been caught positive. So let us ensure that we do our part as the government continues. So that's on COVID-19, which is something we're going to be discussing when we get to the point where we look at matters that have been in the week that has been later on the show, and what that means for the country and what is expected, because a total lockdown would definitely be a disaster for our country. We may not have the infrastructure, we may not have the finance, we may not have even the data to know how to lock it down, because there are people who definitely would be going hungry, and that is likely to also affect our security and many other areas. So that is something that we need to keep our eyes on. On page 5 of The Standard is a rather disturbing story of a county that spent 8.4 million to build a health facility, and there is a structure, at least there is something that is there. The only thing is that it's no longer being used as a health facility, but is being used as a chicken coop. 8.4 million shillings later, and it is being used as a chicken coop. Now, the facility was to have a reception, treatment room, maternity ward, and was initially conceived by the Nakuru Town West Constituency Development Fund, and the financing was done in 2013 to 2014 with the first allocation of 3 million shillings. The total amount of money that was spent on this particular facility was 8.4 million shillings. But guess what? It's chicken right now that are in that particular facility, whereas we know that our health is in dire straits and we are in dire need of facilities that can take care of our health needs that we have that are huge and vast. But there you go, 8.4 million shillings later, it is now a chicken coop. On page 6 of the Standard, new rebels with a cause or political turncoats. And this is, of course, now looking at the political scenario. There's been quite a lot that has been happening. And what is interesting about politicians, particularly in Kenya, is that they will say one thing today and tomorrow they completely do a turnaround and say something completely different. Now, 11 months ago, these particular politicians were singing praises to President Uhuru Kenyatta and almost suggesting that he should use an iron fist on what was then the opposition. But they have now turned around and are claiming that the president is using dictatorial language and dictatorial methods. So one wonders what happened. And some of these politicians, according to this picture, we have Jane Kihara from Naivasha, Kimani Ngunjiri, Silvanus Osoro. We have the likes of Didmas Baraza, Moses Kuria, who are more or less, allied to the deputy president and in the Tanga wing of the Jubilee faction. So, of course, a turnaround there that is really, I'd say synonymous with our politicians in Kenya. I'm not sure whether that's something that happens world over with politicians. We do know that politicians do make promises when they're coming to office, and rarely do they keep those promises, and that's not just unique to Kenya. But now, when it comes to this turnaround where they say one thing today and a completely different thing the next day, it is one thing that we remain to see how that is going to be. And of course, that also reflects on what we mentioned as the headline for the Standard, which is curse of kingmakers. They say one thing, and as soon as the king has been made, those who are kingmakers are left to literally look for other political careers and alignments. And as we continue, I'd also just like to bring on board David Osiani, who's joining us to look at what is making headlines. Good morning, David, and good to have you.
Good morning, Mike.
Karibu sana. And as we continue to look at that, yes, it will also be reviewing the week that was with him. But maybe, David, just to start off with where we are right now, page 6, new rebels with a cause or political turncoats. These are politicians who are singing praises, literally, of President Uhuru Kenyatta and almost suggesting that he should be dealing with the opposition with an iron fist. In other words, they were saying it's okay, become a little bit of a benevolent dictator and deal with the opposition and deal with them resoundingly. Now, they've turned around and they're claiming that the president, as the Jubilee party leader, is running the party with an iron fist. So one wonders what happened. Your thoughts on how our politics runs in Kenya, particularly that the fact that they have no shame to say one thing today and tomorrow they completely turn around.
Thank you very much, Mike. That is the epitome of lack of consistency in politics. I think we need to get to a point where, as one of the journalists in the country said last night, we stand for something, not for someone. There is a need for consistency. One needs to look back at the last 10 years, for example, and say, so and so has constantly and consistently been voicing issues related to social justice or the economy or democracy, and that they have stood on that pedestal, whether or not it suited them. The young people who today would stand up and say Uhuru is dictatorial, or even the old ones, because even at 55 they still declare themselves young. These are the very people who, at the height of the country's clamor for justice and democracy. In 2017, ahead of the elections, when there was the electoral amendment laws being worked on, these are the same cabal of politicians who stood in the Senate and Parliament and they bludgeoned the law to suit Jubilee at the time. And Orengo famously would decry, governments eat their own children. Today, what you do, which you obviously know is wrong, may be suitable for you. But I have been here in the past when the governments of Moi and Kibaki heavily punished the very people who seemed to have been the promoters of lack of rule of law. Now, I remember when there had been the post-election rift, Ndini Nyoro, who was a young person, who is one of the young people, my fellow age mates, that I had known would be a fresh lease of life, said, President Uhuru Kenyatta crushed them, literally. You know, he said, be a dictator if it means being a dictator. Why? Because at that time, it seemed suitable for them. Now, today, they sit on the opposite side. And this is a call also for the NASA MPs in Parliament. Just do what is right. Even when these fellow comrades now are going through fire and brimstone because they called for it, they stood for nothing, yet they want to now stand against their benefactors when they have never stood for Kenyans. They have stood for different political voices. Stand for what is right.
The thing is, David, unfortunately, for the electorate, there seems to be no punishment or there seems to be no punitive measure for them to literally, do this with no shame whatsoever. Because if they knew that there was a penalty at the ballot, then maybe they would behave. So what would really even make them behave? It's purely a game of interests.
One of my friends said that the quote he remembers from me the most is that the Kenyan electorate is overrated. And I want to repeat that our electorate would, you will laugh at what happens when we get to the ballot. You see, that is why Mutai Ngunyi says, you cannot hire a Kikuyu, you can only rent them.
You can rent them.
Okay, and that goes for many other tribal, ethnic bases in the country. It has become their thing, so we will sing along until it's the last minute. I want us to determine to be a country that elects its leaders based on the content of their character, based on what they have done for country before, based on what their history of consistency is as regards the rule of law, as regards development, as regards the need for a strengthened economy, and not how charismatic sometimes they are. And yet we have sufficient proof that that charisma has led constantly and unashamedly towards the pits of further, poverty for the nation. I want and wish and pray that Kenyans would stand and look at themselves in the mirror each morning and say, is the leader I have elected a reflection of who I am? Because if we are going to elect loots and thieves every day, and we want to sing how the path to the top must always be through the garden of graft, and then tomorrow we want to say, oh, he is so pathetic, yet we had the opportunity to put or remove them from there and we did nothing for it, then we are to blame for the consequences we face. Actually, matter of factly, Kenyans need to know that if they had been strong enough, then there is a recall clause. One may say, no, it's too hard to recall a member of parliament. It's not too hard for a determined people who know what they are worth and who know what they want.
Absolutely. And that's of course something that we could talk until the cows come home, because politics is definitely one thing that requires a lot of energy to even discuss. But let's look at other stories in the papers. And page 10, NAT lecturers oppose plan to reopen schools. And this is a story, of course, that has been going on for a while now. There is a suggestion that schools should open in June. Parents feel that that might not be the right time because for the them, they feel we do not want our children to be used as an experiment. And unfortunately, David, maybe you'll agree with me, we tend as a country to do things, then, once the effects hit us, we come back later. I'm not sure that we have structures in place to protect our children for them to go back to school, because we're not just talking about classrooms, we're talking about transport, how they get to school, we're talking about boarding schools, how they sleep in their dormitories. There needs to be a lot put in place before we can think about having our children go back to school.
You know, the gentleman managing the emergency center, public health emergency center on coronavirus, is called Dr. Kasera. And I think, if I am not wrong, he made it very clear that yes, it may be hard for children to infect other children. I hope I'm quoting the right person. But it is very easy for adults to infect children, and very hard for children to infect adults with coronavirus as part of the interim studies. Now, the teachers may want, and I bet they want this, believing that they're doing it for the good of the country. They want our children to go back to school. And they're saying that where we've reached, we need to consider reopening. But you need to know, Mike, that we have only come this far with minimal fatalities because of the measures that we have put as a country. Countries that attempted to lift some of these measures prematurely, that had been doing so well, even like Ghana, even countries like South Korea, that had been doing amazing, even Germany, had their numbers grow in 4, 5, 6-fold. Now, once we appreciate that that is our case here, because as it were, we are in the deadly phase of coronavirus spread, and children are not spared coronavirus. I remember, because I keenly follow this Ask the DG thing by Dr. Amoth. One of the people on that live chat asked the question, how old has been the youngest fatality of coronavirus? And the youngest fatality was a 6-year-old. So it means this does not spare children either. And so I request the teachers, the NAT leadership, I know you're doing this for the good of the country, and we appreciate your desire for our children to get back to normalcy, but kindly leave that call with who is in charge and knows best. That is the doctors. Let the researchers and the doctors handling our pandemic be the ones to decide that now it is safe for us to get back our children to school.
Absolutely. And just for a point of information so that we would know, there is a task force that is working on that, and Kenyans have only today to file their views with special task force. So if you would like to participate, remember public participation is in the Constitution. You have a right as a parent to weigh in and put in your voice, and there's a task force that is receiving that, today being the deadline. So you would need to ensure that you do that so that you'll not say that your voice was not heard. Let's look at the Daily Nation headline, and it is to do with a referendum, major hitch in push for early referendum. We do know that COVID-19, one of the things that it paused, not stopped, is what was now gaining momentum, known as reggae. And of course, that has continued in the background. And we have seen Raila meeting with the women leaders this week and discussing things that women leaders would want reflected on the referendum. But there is two questions that need to be answered before we can even think about it. One is a question of budget, and second is the question of the competency for IEBC to do that. David Osiani, is a governance consultant and expert. What are your thoughts on the referendum, especially given the spanner that has now been thrown into the works named as COVID-19? Is this something we should even be discussing, or should we be looking at stabilizing the economy and then eventually maybe look at political structures?
I think with COVID will come reconfiguration of resources of the country and reconfiguration of priorities in the country. The question is a referendum at the top of that priority? The answer to that lies with the country owners and drivers. Because if we're talking about economic recovery, for example, the question that would follow that is there a potential for the reconfigured and restructured constitution to do a better job at getting us back on our feet. If the answer is yes, then the referendum will go on. If the answer is no, then the referendum will be put to a hold. Now, how they decide this will be up to them as the country leaders. I guess that it is obvious there is a big need to get our economy going after this coronavirus. We have been, the country has literally, in the economic facet, has literally halted. And so we are going to be keen to see what happens, what becomes of the referendum. If they believe that the referendum is one of the tripods that would help achieve an economic recovery, and that a constitution that is remade with different aspects of it coming into place will be the pathway towards resuscitating our economy, then I can almost guarantee you the referendum will go on. However, they may think otherwise and decide that we can make do with what we currently have and still manage to get out of this without a referendum.
Without a referendum. Well, let's wait and see as that discussion goes on. For now, we're going to take a break. There's a lot more in your dailies this morning, but for now, we want to take a short break. When we come back, let's review the week that has been and look at some of the highlights as we continue with that. Remember, you're welcome to participate in the conversation. The hashtag is KTN Morning Express, and you can tweet at KTN News, or you can tweet me directly, and that's at Michael G. Gitonga. We take that break. Let's see you on the other side of the break.